Today, we're just about 8 miles outside of Cardiff city centre, deep in the countryside, taking a brief look at two beautiful Neolithic burials. We're going to start with St. Lythans burial chamber, and we're going to go to Tinkinswood Chambered Tomb. Both of them are a fairly brief walk from the road and quite easy to get to. They're both protected by Cadw, Welsh heritage. St. Lythans Chambered Tomb reminds me a lot of Coldrum Long Barrow, whereas the nearby Tinkinswood Chambered Tomb reminds me of Stony Littleton burial. The current tomb really belies the scale. You just have three uprights holding a fairly large capstone. This would have been the door to a passage. But excavations in 2012 showed that the original chambered tomb was surrounded by a cairn wall, much as we saw at Stony Littleton. It's a very similar burial. It's never been properly excavated. No one really knows how many people were buried here, how many chambers there were. The burial mound had already been completely destroyed by the time people thought to record such things. But locals claim that it's linked to Arthur, the legend of Culhwch and Olwen, from two 14th century texts. Really, it's a burial mound. It's the doorway to the burial mound. And the very substantial size of these doorways means that they're often the only thing that's left behind. And they stand quite starkly on hillsides overlooking beautiful rolling countryside, with everything else long gone, their purpose for being here eroded and removed by farmers and house builders and flattened away. But it is, as always, a very beautiful spot. I don't think I've ever been to a Stone Age burial mound which hasn't been in a really beautiful spot. And I always like to think that they were selected for the same aesthetic values that we hold today. They wanted to see those rolling valleys and the beautiful trees standing on the horizon, the clouds rolling over the landscape. And they came here to see their family, to bury them. Normally they had multiple chambers, and we'll see that at our next burial. So I'm going to assume multiple chambers here with multiple generations, and for generations they came and visited their family. In some cultures, the family is buried and then retrieved from time to time or visited from time to time, much as in some parts of Asia today they would have a picnic at the cemetery, or in some ancient British finds the suggestion that parts of the body, like the skull, were removed from a tomb and brought to the home. So this is a living memorial, I believe. And now it's just some beautiful stones standing in a field starkly against the sky. But I certainly enjoyed this one, although the next one is much more complete. And really gives a very good idea of what St. Lythans' tomb would have looked like, but with the capstone being maybe 3 or 4 times larger, and the rest of the tomb being 70% complete. So it's best to visit these two together. Just at the back here of the gate, I'm always struck by how the three stones holding up the capstone, the two side ones are the largest, but let's call it the door stone, is always quite pointy. If you look at Little Kit's Cotty, you see that. And one can almost imagine it being turned to enter or squeezing past it. It's it's not a complete panel door. It almost looks like it's meant to move. I'd be interested what a historian thinks of that. And we start off here. You can see St. Lythans Tomb next to Cardiff. That's Cardiff Bay on the right. And we're going to make our way over to Tinkinswood, which is a little harder to get to and easier to miss. So I'm going to put up a couple of photos. But here's the St. Lythans burial mound. You just park on the road wherever you can find a suitable space and walk up through a path in the field. For Tinkinswood, I parked up in the residential roads on the top right and followed a footpath through the fields, which is fairly well signposted. And when you arrive, you're greeted with a chambered tomb. So it's a bit of an unusual design in that the chambered on the side, the mound is quite low. Possibly that's from repairs. I would suggest that originally it was as high as the capstone. And there's a obvious gate and entrance in towards the stone. And like I said with St. Lythans, the, let's call it the door stone, faces directly towards you. There is no opening. You can't move that door with your little pinky finger. But here's the actual tomb. Under this capstone, the largest in Wales, and it really is substantial, is a opening which I'd suggest is the channel through to the side chambers. I personally think this has been quite heavily reinterpreted when it was reconstructed, and that the mound would have been much higher, meet the height of the top of the capstone, going to the back of the current mound, gently descending with dry stone wall around the base to hold the soil in, and chambers in the middle. Now, chambers have all gone. There was an opening at the back where it's been dug open. It's all in a bit of disarray. So although from the front this looks like one of the most complete burials, it's actually a bit confusing because it's clearly been reconstructed and it doesn't feel like it's been reconstructed in keeping with the original design. It's been reinterpreted. It's a beautiful little burial and it's very impressive, but I feel like the way it's been repaired over the years takes from the original design. It's harder to understand quite how it looks, and obviously this has been here for 4,500 years. So I'm not blaming Caddo. I think they do a great job of repairing and maintaining these burials, but it's probably not the burial that was experienced by the Neolithic people. But I really enjoyed this burial, as well as St. Lythans, and I hope you did. If you subscribe, we'll be visiting plenty more Neolithic sites in the coming months. And although it's hard to understand exactly what the funeral practices were of the ancient Britons, I do find it interesting that this basic structure of a capstone, two uprights, a door stone, and a chambers behind with a walled mound is common across the whole of the UK and into Europe. So there must have been some practice to this. There must have been some spiritual meaning, a religion lost to time and how it dealt with death. So I find these very interesting places because obviously there's no houses left, but it's only the places of worship and the burial mounds which are really left of a culture. I wouldn't say a civilization, but a culture that we often overlook and maybe look down on a little bit. But when you look at these stones, try lifting them and say whether you're impressed by the ancient Britons because the capstones here are very heavy and large. Okay, you can build a mud ramp and drag them up. And St. Lythans, yes, some rope, bunch of people, pull up that stone, what is it, a ton of weight? But when you look at Tinkinswood, that really is 3 or 4 times bigger. That's heavier than a car, but without any wheels. And it's just not mounting the capstone, but it's actually bringing the stone here in the first place. All for a fairly small community. And as I say, there are dozens of these. And if there are dozens of them remaining, you have to assume that there were many hundreds times more that have been destroyed by the plough. I was certainly touched by the offering left here, as you often find. It's very rare that you go to a Neolithic burial and don't find an offering from someone who still respects the old ways, even if we don't quite know what they were.